Hi there, this is a quick video showing you how to create a graph in Excel and then label it properly with the trend lines and so forth. So what I've done here so far, I'm going to do a sample graph using the density of aluminum. So your graph, of course, is going to be based on our lab with the percent abundance of hydrogen 1 and the average atomic mass of hydrogen. But I'm going to show you an example with the density of aluminum. So we could use this as our example to create the graph in our lab. And so the first thing you want to do in Excel, open up any Excel program, and you want to create yourself a data table. I made mine nice and pretty for the recording, but you don't have to. You just need to have two columns that shows the values or the data you collected from your table, the values that you want to graph. So for you, you could show a column of hydrogen 1% abundance and a column of average atomic mass. For mine, I want to graph the volume and the mass of aluminum, right? So the independent and the dependent variable should be on your graph. And so when you set up your graph, you should have the X, then the Y. So for me, my independent variable is my volume, and my dependent variable is the mass. And so I have it set up this way because when I go to create my graph, it's just easier. If you put the X first and the Y, then the computer knows what to do. So what I'm going to do now, once I have my data table, I have the data I need, I'm going to highlight the data I want to graph. So I've highlighted all of the numbers. Next, I'm going to go up to Insert, and I want to choose this last one, which is a scatter plot. So you can see here, there's lots of different graph options. For us, and what we're going to be doing in here, the scatter plot is our best choice. So I'm going to click on that one. And then this very first one is also the best one. The rest are going to put lines in there for you. You can see the bottom ones, if I move my cursor out of the way, gives you big bubble dots, and they kind of gets all over the place when you're looking at your data. But anyway, so I'm going to use this first one. So I'm going to click that. And now I have my graph. And so now what I want to do is clean it up. I'm going to start by putting in a chart title. You should always have a title to your graph. And so for mine, I'm going to call it density of aluminum. Or another way to name a graph would be to name it based on what you're graphing and what the axes titles will be. So since I'm graphing my independent variable and my dependent variable there that I see in the graph, what I'm going to do is name it that way. And when you name it, you usually name Y first, the Y axis first. So I'm going to name my graph mass versus volume. And the reason why I did that is because my mass is on the y-axis and my volume is on the x-axis. So usually when you title your graph, it's y versus x. Or if you want to just give it a title like mine that says density of volume, that's good. If you want to do both, that's also good. So either way. Next up, I want to get my labels on my axes, right? So I want to know what is graphed there and what the units are. So I'm going to click on my chart, click this plus button here, and go to axes titles. So I want to add those in. And now I could go back and fix them. And so the one on the bottom should be my volume, but you could double check that you've highlighted it correctly. So I could see my data for volume goes from 2 up to, looks like 9.5 is the highest one. And so looking at my graph, the bottom, the volume goes from 2 to about 10 or 0 to 10. So yeah, I graphed it correctly. And so the bottom here is volume. And you usually include the units in parentheses if there are any. And so I labeled my x-axis volume, and the unit that it's measured in is milliliters. Next, I'm going to label my y-axis. My y-axis is mass, and that's in grams. Right, so your independent variable in this case my mass, my dependent variable, in this case my mass is on my y-axis and my independent variable is on my x-axis. Right? And again, you name it y versus x, or whatever's on your y-axis versus x-axis. The next thing we want to do, and it should work out for us as well, given that we take the data correctly, that it kind of looks like it's a straight line, right? If I look at my graph. And so what we want to do is add what's called a trend line. A trend line is going to show us how good our data is, basically. So I'm going to click on the graph again. I'm going to hit this plus button. And this time I'm going to go down to trend line. And I'm also going to go over to this arrow. And I want more options. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. So I clicked on my graph. I went down and clicked trend line, and you can see now there's a dotted line on my graph. And I'm going to click the arrow and go to more options. So not only do I want my trend line there, but it's typical, although in this case we don't necessarily need it for this type of lab that we're doing, it's good practice to show the R-squared value and the equation. So clicking these last two boxes. And so now what I'm doing, looking at my graph, I have a trend line which shows the closer the dots are to that line, the better your data. And it looks like all of my dots, all of my data points are really close or on that line. So it's a linear relationship and my data looks really good. The R-squared value that you see here is also another way to express whether your data is good. The closer that R-squared value is to 1, the better the data. And in this case, we have 0.997, that's really close to 1, that's really good data. And then finally, above that is the line equation. And so let's say I had another reading of volume that's, I don't know, 100 milliliters. If I have that equation, now I could plug in 100 milliliters for my X value and solve for Y, right? So that equation allows us to solve for any other data points that we want to put onto our graph or use in calculations. So again, what you want to do is create your data table, highlight the data, go up into scatter plot, get your graph plotted. You want to title it, title the axes with the units if there are any. In this case, you will have units. Add in your trend line and also display your R-squared value and your line equation. If you need any help with this, just let me know. We'll also be doing this in class together.